And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 42. And we are starting out this week with Legacy Weapon. 7 mana, legendary artifact. You can pay WUBRG, white, blue, black, red, and green, exile target permanent. If Legacy Weapon would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into owner's library. So obviously that second part is the, avoid cheating it into play scenario. But for me, I just think this is such a great card in a Commander game. I mean, if I'm playing a 5-color deck, I don't, but if I did, this is just going to go in every single time. 5 mana to exile a permanent seems pretty good. And in a 5-color deck, it shouldn't be an issue to be able to get that WUBRG, right? In particular, a Gigantha, the Wellspring deck, has that ability, tap, add WUBRG. This mana can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. So you just use it to pay the activation of your Legacy Weapon, right? This just becomes tap my commander, exile target permanent. So I think it's particularly good in a deck like that. Coming in at number 2 this week, Leonan Elder. 1 white mana, cat cleric, 1/1. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you may gain 1 life. So this is basically a Soul Warden for artifacts, right? A card I've never seen in a Commander game, and for the most part doesn't look very impressive. But again, we've gotten to this saturation point with treasure tokens, clue tokens, all these artifact tokens that are being created in every game so much. And I almost think that maybe this is better than a Soul Warden in a Commander game now, because you're almost getting more of those artifacts than you are creatures. I think it is likely that in a lot of games you could play a Leonan Elder and gain more life than you would from a Soul Warden. Just think about all the mana rocks people are playing, and then on top of that, all those artifact tokens that get shot out. Someone's got a Smothering Tithe in play. You're going to be gaining a lot of life off of this guy, I think. Coming in at number 3 is Liability, and this is a really interesting one. This is another card that I've never actually seen before. 1 black enchantment. Whenever a non-token permanent is put into a player's graveyard from the battlefield, that player loses 1 life. I mean, that's it. Now, of course, if this wasn't non-token, just like I was talking about with the treasure tokens, this card would be bananas, so it doesn't work there. However, whenever a non-token permanent is put into a player's graveyard, they lose 1 life. That can be really good in certain scenarios. It can be a fantastic drain effect if you're in maybe that Mogus deck, that group slug deck, stuff like that. This might be a great fit there. Coming in at number 4, Library of Latnam. 4 and a blue sorcery. An opponent chooses 1, right? So you're going to cast this, and then your opponent is going to choose which one of these effects you're going to get. Draw 3 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So that's basically draw 3 cards. But however, just like I said with Latnam's Legacy, sometimes drawing those cards on the next upkeep can actually be a huge boon for you if you're casting a wheel effect or something like that. 5 mana, draw 3 cards is, it's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. However, the other option is you search your library for a card and put that card in your hand. So that's pretty good, right? It's just a tutor. If you're in a politics deck, this might be good, right? You can use this in the political way where I cast it, my opponent lets me search my library to go get an answer. I think this is a great fit in the opponent's choice sort of deck idea that I came up with, where all the cards in the deck, you're letting your opponents choose and you're using it in a political way, right? So you cast this and you get to choose the opponent, obviously. So you choose the opponent that's going to let you go get that thing out of your deck that you really need. Maybe you need a board wipe to answer something. 5 mana tutor doesn't sound great, but in a deck that doesn't have black, pretty darn good, I think. Coming in at number 5, this is just a funny card. Liege of Hollows, 2 green, Spirit 3/4. When Liege of Hollows dies, each player may pay any amount of mana. Then each player creates a number of 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens equal to the number of mana they paid this way. So this can work in the hug strategy, obviously. If you're playing a hug deck, everyone gets to create squirrels. That seems kind of fun. I had mentioned this card in one of my should be commanders videos because I thought this really felt like an actual legendary creature to me. Just the art, what it's doing, the name, everything about it feels like a legendary creature. I think this would make for a great build around because you can engineer this to your advantage. Obviously, in a squirrel tribal deck, this can work. Yes, everyone can make squirrels if they want to, but you're going to have those anthem effects that you're going to take more advantage of. If you're in a deck like a Griswold deck, again, this is a fantastic fit because you want your opponents to have creatures. Of course, they don't have to pay. that's fine. You'll just pay and you'll get a bunch of squirrel tokens. So either way, it's sort of a win-win for you. It's a very interesting, unique card, and I think there's a couple of different ways that you can use it. Coming in at number 6 is Lifeline, 5-mana artifact. Whenever a creature dies, if another creature is on the battlefield, return the first card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is a very powerful effect, and again, a universal one, right? It works for everybody. You always got to be careful with these cards. Like I said with Intruder Alarm, you can go off with that card, sure, but so can your opponents. Lifeline, the same thing. This card would be absolutely busted if it was just you. The fact that your opponents can use it too is what sort of holds it back a little. You got to be careful at least, right? You got to take more advantage of it than your opponents do. If you're in any sacrifice theme, this can be really good. You can just sacrifice stuff, bring it back into play on the end step, do it again, right? If you have a sack outlet and like 4 or 5 creatures in play that you want to be sacrificing, you can really go to town with this. You got to make sure there's one on board. It doesn't have to be yours. It can be anybody's. As long as there is one creature on the battlefield, this will definitely work. I mentioned this in my Tuk Tuk the Explorer deck tech because I thought that was an interesting fit. Works great in any deck where maybe you want to be sacrificing your commander, right? There are some commanders out there, like Elenda is another one, where I sacrifice my Elenda, I create all those tokens, then my Elenda comes back into play on the end step, so it might be a great fit in a deck like that as well. Coming in at number 7 is Life Force, green and a green enchantment. And you can pay green and counter target black spell. And I had mentioned Death Grip in my color specific video where you can pay black and a black to counter target green spell, right? These are the reverse of each other. And a couple of people are like, hey, what about Life Force? That's great too. It is. And obviously for both of these cards, it is the case that these cards are very playable because black and green are very popular colors in the format. I talk about this with Compost as well, where, you know, I've chucked Compost in a couple of my decks where there's no color changing going on at all. Black is just such a popular color in the format that I find that I get lots of card draw off of my Compost no matter what. And also I think the same can be said for Life Force, where you could probably throw it in a green deck and chances that nobody is going to be playing black at the table is pretty slim. And again, those multicolored decks, right? Don't forget that Atraxa is a black card, so you can counter that, right? The more colors people play in their decks, the better cards like this become. Coming in at number 8, Light Minefield, 2 white enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures attack, Light Minefield deals damage to each of those creatures equal to the number of attacking creatures. So that's a bit of a mouthful. So the way this works is somebody attacks with one creature, whether it be you or anybody else, 1 damage is dealt to that creature, right? If somebody attacks with 2 creatures, now you're going to deal 2 damage to each of those creatures, right? So the more creatures that attack, the more damage they're all going to take, which is what makes this card so fantastic, I think. I mean, obviously it's a pillow fort type of card. It particularly hoses certain strategies, like a Krenko deck is just going to be completely shut off by this. It's a card that I used to see quite a bit back in the day. Haven't seen it for a while. Thought I'd give it a mention for anyone who doesn't know it exists. It's great in a pillow fort strategy, but even great in a strategy where maybe you want to be dealing damage to your creatures, like that Jacques Lever deck that I mentioned, where you're sort of hitting your own creatures. Now you can just attack, like with your enrage creatures. If you're in that Dino enrage scenario, you can attack with your creature and get that enrage trigger. Also fantastic in a Tajik Legion's Edge deck, which is a deck that I made recently and put this in here because you can prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. So in that deck, as long as you're not attacking with your Tajik, right, but he doesn't prevent damage to himself, but for all of your other creatures, you can go nuts and the Light Minefield damage will be prevented. So it's really good there as well. Coming in at number 9 this week is Light from Within, another card that I have never seen before, period. Never mind in a commander game. I never even knew this card existed. 2 white enchantment. Has Chroma, which is an ability from Eventide, which is essentially devotion, sort of. It counts mana symbols, right? And this one says each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each white mana symbol in its mana cost. I'm really surprised I've never seen this card before. I think it's pretty darn good. I mean, if you just put this in like a mono white deck, like say your Safara deck, right? That's got 3 white mana symbols. So now your Safara becomes a 10/10. That's pretty good. Don't forget all of your other creatures get this boost as well. They all get the boost for each white mana symbol that they have. In your Linden, the Steadfast Queen deck, right? That's 3 white mana symbols. So your commander now is a 6/6. So that's pretty good, but doesn't have to be a mono white commander, right? Your Feather the the Redeemed is going to get +2/+2. Your Sigarda, Host of Herons, is going to get +2/+2. There's lots of commanders out there, even not in mono white, that would really benefit from this boost. And then remember, all your creatures, right? So each of your creatures are going to get at the very least a +1/+1 if they're white at all. And then it just goes up from there. So I think this card really could see a lot more play. And coming in at number 10 this week is Livewire Lash. And this is a card that I think is relatively well known. I'm not quite sure. You never can tell with these cards sometimes. I think I've seen this in a game maybe once. I'm mentioning this because I sort of discovered it's actually better than I actually originally thought it was. I've recently put this in a deck. So 2-mana artifact equipment, and it has equip 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell, this creature deals 2 damage to any target. So this card was first brought to my attention because someone said it's an absolute auto include in a feather deck, right? Because in a feather deck, you're going to equip this to your commander because you're always targeting your own commander with your spells, right? So they can get that rebound effect. And every time you do so, you're going to throw 2 damage around. So that seems pretty darn good. I also had thrown this in a Glissa deck that I had made because I thought, well, Glissa's got Death Touch and First Strike. She's going to be a 5/3 First Strike, but also with Death Touch. So the Death Touch there is the important part, right? Because with Livewire Lash, it is that creature dealing the damage. This creature deals 2 damage to any target. So really in any deck where you have a commander with Death Touch, and there's a lot of them out there, you could just chuck this on your commander, right? Because every time one of your opponents targets it with a spell, like a Path to Exile, whatever the case may be, yeah, you're going to lose your commander, but you get to take one of their creatures out on the way out the door, right? You're going to kill any creature on the board, you're going to deal it 2 damage, and because your commander has Death Touch, you're going to end up killing it. I have a Questing Beast deck, which has Death Touch, and I thought, well, this is probably good in that deck. It is a little bit of a Voltron strategy, so now my commander becomes a 6/4. That's pretty good with all those other abilities. Also has the Death Touch, and when my opponents try to remove it, I get to take a creature with me as he goes back to the command zone. But then I thought, oh yeah, I've also got a lot of fight effects in that deck where I'm targeting my own commander a lot. So it's extra good because now I can use one of those fight effects, kill one of my opponent's creatures because my commander has Death Touch, and then because I'm targeting it with a spell, I get to do the Livewire Lash effect as well. So I'm going to kill 2 creatures every single time. And in a mono green deck, they're not great at killing creatures, right? That's one of the drawbacks of playing a mono green deck, and this is a great way to do so in a deck like that. So I think this card could probably go in a lot of decks. I think you could probably throw it in any deck where your commander has Death Touch, and it'll give you enough value to be worth the spot. But that is it for today. 10 more cards that you should be putting in your commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I have a TCG player link. It is in the description below. Give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.